And we are live. Welcome everybody to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, May 19th. And before we kick off the show, of course, I'm Adam Hernandez. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Nick Bergfeld. We were supposed to have a special guest with us today, Mr. Leon Williams, who is affiliated with the NAACP and also One Lubbock. He is not feeling well today and was not able to make it, so we are sending positive thoughts and prayers out to him for a speedy recovery. Hope he gets well soon. And so we just have a improv show for you today. We do have a lot to talk about though, so we should be okay. Again, we hope that Mr. Leon Williams is doing great. And thank you everybody for tuning in. So Nick, I guess we can go ahead and kick it off. We have an update on the Sanctuary City for the Unborn, right?
Yeah, so this week, a little bit earlier on, we've heard now of the first confirmed court case against the city of Lubbock, filed by Planned Parenthood as well as the American Civil Liberties Union. And so they've hired a pretty well-known, well-regarded legal firm to represent them in this case. And their arguments are that both at the federal and the state level, that the ordinance the city of Lubbock passed is both unconstitutional as well as illegal under state law. So the city's response so far has been to say that they will treat this ordinance as any other and defend it. And then just the other day, one of the city council members said that the city intends to defend this ordinance vigorously. And so, we're going to see this topic unfold as this kind of goes forward. But it's one of those challenging things to look at, especially when you see legislation similar that's happening at the state level, which very much so would either preempt or would have an impact beyond just simply what the city of Lubbock is doing. And so, for a lot of folks, I think the major question now is, what is the cost of our efforts here? What is the cost of Lubbock taking this stance? This could rack up significant legal fees over time, especially when you consider the fact that the legal firm that these organizations, Planned Parenthood and ACLU, have hired, in the likely event that they win, it is very likely that the city will have to end up paying compensation for their legal team's representation as well. So this could be very difficult, I think, financially for us, as well as a difficult conversation as a city. And one other aspect that I just want to point out on this topic, when you look at voter turnout, oftentimes the conversation that we're seeing in the media on this has been that an overwhelming or a landslide majority of Lubbock citizens voted for in support of this ordinance. But what I would point out is that less than 30% of the eligible voters in the city of Lubbock even participated in this vote. And so to say that this is an overwhelming majority, or to say that this is something that the citizens of Lubbock are wanting outright, is just simply not the case. If anything, this is just an indication of where voter apathy is in our community now about city government, and they're feeling as though that there's just not really much that can change on that. And Adam, if you want to have some words or weigh in on this.
Yeah, I do agree that these kind of situations make it very frustrating. We were just having a short conversation about this right before the show, and yeah, it's just very frustrating when you have so many people who don't want something to happen, but more often it's the minority of people that end up basically making all the decisions for all of the rest of us. And so it's really unfortunate. And like you said, I just kind of want to harp on that for a second. If you look at the voter turnout for this issue, what was the total number? Was like
34,000, something like
30,
that.
yeah, so like 34,000 people is not anywhere near any majority in Lubbock from any community. And then when you look at that, only a certain percentage of those total, I think it was like 34,000 actually voted for the ordinance, and it's even less people who have made this decision for us. And we don't want to be the "I told you so" organization, but we were definitely telling people this would happen if this transpired, and it transpired, and it's now happening. And so again, one good thing about this though is there is some changes that are being proposed to the charter, and we can talk about that in a second in the charter review update. So there is some promising things for the future, so that this might not happen again. But in the meantime, we do have to deal with this. I just think it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, and to kind of go into the next topic of conversation. So citizens should be aware of this. We, as the city of Lubbock, are going to transition into ERCOT. That's the Electric Reliability of Texas, or Electric Reliability Council of Texas. This is a electricity market system. The vast majority of the state of Texas is in this system. And if you recall, some months ago during the polar vortex, this was the entity and the market that collapsed during that period in time and created, now the death tolls are still going up in terms of number of individuals that we now know have died as a result of the power outages, the widespread power outages that happened throughout the state. And one of the things that was unique about Lubbock, we are one of the largest cities in Texas that was not part of the ERCOT grid system. Instead, we were part of something called the Southwest Power Pool, and that entity did not lose power in the same way that the rest of the state did. And so now we are actually transitioning over into that system that failed over the winter time. Our local officials, as well as state level officials, are telling us that things are going to be fixed, that we shouldn't anticipate these types of challenges. Although ERCOT itself is saying that in the summer months of this year, their projections are saying that we'll have significant heat waves, and there's a good opportunity that there will be periods of potentially brownouts in certain regions, in certain areas. Something that Lubbock citizens should be aware of on this topic. When we transition over, expect about 30 minutes worth of a planned power outage over Memorial Day weekend. So in this upcoming Memorial Day weekend, Saturday and Sunday, your power at some point during that period in time is going to go out for 30 minutes. You can go to Lubbock Power and Light's website to look out. They're trying to create maps of where they're going to do this. They're essentially switching a substation by substation over from one electrical system that powers just the state of Texas, switching to that from the Southwest Power Pool, which connected us to other states as well, such as Oklahoma. And so, this topic, one of the challenges here, because a lot of Lubbock citizens over these past couple of months, especially after the polar vortex, they asked the question, how did we get here? How is it that we as a city got to the point where we're essentially coming into this failed system? And, what were the decisions that led up to this? And how do we sort of reach this point in time? And there's actually a lot of history on this, and we hope to have some guests on in the future to delve into the nitty gritty of the policy aspects of this. But what we're going to talk about today is just simply about cities and how they think about or don't think about long range planning. And this is a great example of that. So Lubbock, we have known for the better part of 16, 17 years that this was coming. So in order to be a part of that Southwest Power Pool that I talked about earlier, participants in that system have to have a certain amount of power generating capacity. You have to contribute to the pool, right? So that's how a pool works. And because of our load, so that's the amount of energy that we use, because of our size, there was a certain amount of expected power generating capacity that we also had to bring to the table in order for us to be a participant. Lubbock knew that its power generating capacity was aging. It knew that its infrastructure was falling apart when it came to this. And rather than think about it in a more strategic way, we essentially, as a city, we delayed. And we didn't really think about this at the level of making new investments in our community. And so one good example that we talk a lot about is the Gateway Fund. So the Gateway Fund was essentially a utility tax that was used to pay for roads, mostly in Southwest and South Lubbock. This is over $100 million was raised through that mechanism. Now, why that even exists in the first place, why those types of taxes exist, and why you can potentially raise bonds by backing them with these taxes is so that you can invest in your utility, right? This is a utility tax that presumably you as a city are using to invest in your utilities and invest in your grid infrastructure, invest in your power generating capacity. So city leadership over time made choices that rather than think about this in the strategic long run, we would essentially take the dollars and take our ability to fundraise, and instead we would use that for roads. And so, these are the factors that have played a role into the decision making and where we are today. The one other thing that I'll say on this topic, and then Adam, I'd like you to weigh in on this too, is when you think about where we were when we made this choice, the train was set in motion over 10 years ago now when we made the decision to go into ERCOT. And we just really haven't thought about newer models of energy generation ever since. And so, even at the global level today, what has happened in the past 10 years? The cost of solar power generation has declined in cost per kilowatt hours by over 50%. And in fact, now globally, the cheapest energy generation that you can purchase is actually solar energy. When we came up with these strategies and when we did the math and said we couldn't afford to go our own way, and we needed to join this ERCOT system because we couldn't afford our own power generation, we were doing all these calculations at a time where what was available to us was radically different. And unfortunately, once we set this process in motion, we never took a step back as a community and asked the question if there were more modern ways of providing for it's about over 650 megawatts is what the city of Lubbock consumes on a daily basis. What were different ways in us to be able to do that? And so this is one of those challenges of city leadership and strategic decision making where you have to be thinking about your city over the long run. And oftentimes, if you're only a 2-year mayor or a 4-year council member, these are the topics that oftentimes you just ignore because it's so far in the distance that it's not something that you want to address. And the cost and the numbers involved in it are so large that it becomes intimidating. And you think that if you bring up these topics that voters aren't going to respect that, or that your constituencies aren't going to be supportive of it. So, Adam, as you're hearing this, what is your thoughts? How are you responding to that?
It just, a lot about what goes on since I've been involved in getting involved in political processes and watching how things unfold, and just hearing what you just said really, it's just par for what goes on. On a regular basis from what I've seen. And again, it's just really frustrating. There's two reasons for me why this is frustrating. There's the always frustrating part of those folks who have held power for quite some time, right? But there's also the frustration, which I have to put against myself as well, because I was one of those people who wasn't paying attention, wasn't getting involved. And I think that this is just, again, all of these things, when they come out to me, it just continues to highlight why it is so important for us to get involved in local political processes. This also highlights to me why we are pushing for a living wage for city council members and for them to treat this like a job, because this is a really big deal. And, somebody probably made those decisions in between a million other things they had going on that weren't that, right? Or anything else they were dealing with on the city council, because of this ridiculous idea, I guess, of it's supposed to be about service and it's not supposed to be a job and we're not supposed to spend that much time. That's BS. We want you to spend the time. If they had the time to focus on this like a full-time job, then they would have the time to delve into whatever research they needed to, call in experts if they needed to, reach out to folks who might have known what was going to happen if you do X or Y or Z, and all of these different things. So there's that part of it. The other part of it is that, so much has already been done. But this is, again, highlights for me why we've got to also not take our eyes off of state government. And never mind local politics or even like the presidential politics, like nobody in general really watches what's going on at their state legislatures. I think more people are now just because of all the different bills that people are opposing. And I think that's good. I think that should continue because really, like you said, has a long history. And for 30, 40 years, there's been one party in power that's made consistently bad decisions. And I'm not in either party, but they have made consistently bad decisions. That this is, demonstrated through actual reality that they've made these bad decisions over and over and over again, really just about money, right? The reason why ERCOT is even separate from the rest of the country because they want to dodge regulation. But if we didn't have regulation, you'd still have houses catching on fire because the wiring isn't correct, or you have direct current coming into your home, or something of that nature. And so, yeah, it's as I listen to these things, it just continues to push me to want to stay involved and try to let as many people know about these things as possible and try to get them involved.
And it's been a rocky rollout. For Lubbock citizens, you've heard the rhetoric around this transition will give you choice. It will give you choice in terms of your electric provider. Now, that is true in some ways. Now, even with that component, though, choice is not going to happen right when we transition into ERCOT. And the reason for that is because even this component of our transition is actually quite hairy. And so because of the nature of our reserve agreements with the Southwest Power Pool, we're not 100% transitioning to ERCOT at one time. In fact, 30% of our city's energy needs will not transition to ERCOT during this period. It's a very difficult, thorny issue that we're sort of trapped in currently. There's a lot of conversations and likely some kind of payment, some kind of buyout that Lubbock will potentially have to do in order to make that transition. Otherwise, this idea of choice is not going to happen until all of the city is inside of ERCOT. And so we're kind of stuck where the rhetoric of saying the reason we need to do this, the reason why it's going to be beneficial is because you can choose who is going to be your retail electric provider, and that will bring you choice. Now, when you peel back a layer of this, and we'll transition after this because I don't want to get this to get too hairy, but ERCOT is effectively a three-layer cake system. You have three components to the ERCOT market. You have power generators. So that's just a company that's pumping out electricity. That's all they do. Then you have what are called transmission distribution utilities. These are entities that are what are called wires companies. This is what Lubbock Power and Light is going to be. So if you thought Lubbock Power and Light was going to disappear out of your life and you'd never have to deal with them again, and the issues that we have with them are going to magically go away, that's not true. They are still going to own and manage all the connections in the city of Lubbock, right? So all the connection problems that you've had, all those issues and things like that, surprise, it's still Lubbock Power and Light that's going to be involved in those conversations, right? We're not escaping them. What we're escaping is the customer service part of Lubbock Power and Light. So instead of Lubbock Power and Light being our customer service, so effectively the part of this whole market, the part of the ERCOT market that is facing us, the consumer, the individual, that is the part is what's going to change. And instead, there will be a large number of companies that will offer that customer service component of the market to you. Now, what they're doing in the back room is they are looking at market prices. So ERCOT is kind of unique in that electricity prices fluctuate on the market about every 15 seconds. And what those companies, what are called retail electric providers, that's going to be the company that's going to be your customer service provider instead of LP&L. What they're doing on the back end is they're watching that electricity market. And they're trying to figure out how can they get rid of the risk in buying electricity and how can they make some profit off of selling you the electricity they're buying on the market. And they have a couple different tools besides just simply buying straight from the market itself. They can create future contracts for electricity in the future that stabilizes the price so that they're not essentially paying what the market rate is in moment to moment. So there's some things that they can do to stabilize it. That is essentially what we're going to be paying for. We're going to be paying for customer service and some kind of company that was going to look at the ERCOT market prices and figure out ways to make profit off of selling us electricity. That is what choice is, right? That is on the back end. That is what that process looks like. It is in economics, and this has been looked at by both folks, academics in the state of Texas as well as nationally. There is an ongoing debate as to how beneficial this actually is in driving down prices. But the rhetoric of you being able to have choice as a customer is very appealing. And so it's something that's oftentimes used as one of the justifications as to why we're doing this. So, that's sort of where we're going. Expect 30-minute outages over Memorial Day weekend. Don't be surprised by that. If you have something that's really essential that you don't want to have power off or things like that, definitely look at the Lubbock Power and Light map to find where you're going to be in the rolling blackouts and make sure that you take that into account. So transitioning from there, so this topic, this is one that we continue to bring awareness to and are able to watch and see how these conversations go. The Charter Review Committee met earlier on this week, and Adam, you were able to watch some of that. So was I. What were your impressions of these conversations? What were the topics that came up in this?
Yeah. So again, wish I could use a different word. Frustrating is going to be the theme of the day. I hate for people to keep hearing that term, but yeah, we were joking about this, and you've got to be hard-headed like me to continue to deal with this stuff, and it's not just me, it's our whole team, but you've got to be really dedicated and committed to doing this, because watching these processes over and over, it's so easy to see why people get turned off from doing this, why they get so frustrated with going and making a public comment or sending an email. But I just want to encourage everybody out there to just keep doing it. We're going to keep staying at the forefront of this, and we're going to keep informing you. And the solution is not to back off, because that's really what a lot of these folks count on. And when I say a lot of these folks, I mean those who are acting in bad faith or who are representing special interest groups over the community as a whole, for instance. Because they're just waiting for people to get fed up and then go away again. But one of the things that I was saying to all of the city council members when I met with them last year was that we're not going anywhere. And so we're going to hold ourselves to that. And we hope that you will continue to join in with us on these issues, because we just can't give up. And then at the end of the day, really the real solution to a lot of this stuff is we have to start making a plan of who can we run for these offices, who is capable, who's eligible, who would do a good job in these city council seats or in the mayor seat, because it just is what it is. And again, I've talked to all the city council members. We're cordial, so this is not anything, this is not coming from a negative place, but a lot of these folks are just stuck in their mind frame, and that's just for a lot of different reasons. It varies depending on the council person. And so when you're dealing with that, if your strategy is to wait for them to change their mind, that's a bad strategy. We've been waiting for that for quite some time. So let me get down off the soapbox and we can talk about what has been going on with the Charter Review Committee. So they've talked about some language cleanup things, and a lot of the language cleanup things are just to update language regarding certain stuff that state law supersedes our local law, right? So the law in Texas was updated and we just never updated our charter, those kind of things, because state law will always have more weight than local law. So regardless of what's in the city charter, if it's illegal according to the state, then the state wins on that. So it's just kind of, we need to clean those things up and get that corrected. So there's some things in there. I won't bog everybody down with that. Another big part of this that we've been advocating on is what's called referendum and recall. And that's a really long way to say a petition process to get an ordinance in front of the city council. So as it currently stands in Lubbock, if you want to get an ordinance in front, like, so for instance, the sanctuary city for the unborn thing, what that group had to do is they had to get at least 5 people together to be an initiating committee. That group of people goes down to the city secretary's office. They file a paper with the city secretary's office, and then that starts the clock for them to get the required amount of signatures. So then you go out with your petition and you get your signatures. At the time when they did this, I think it was around, I think like close to 4,000 signatures or something that were needed, like 3,600, something like that.
Yeah, 36.
So this was based off of 25% of the total number of voters in the last municipal election, which means the people who are voting for mayor and city council. That number of people, 25% of that is the number of signatures you needed, which worked out to 3,600 last year. Because the presidential election and the municipal election got put together in 2020, if you wanted to do a petition right now under the current setup, you would need about 19,000 signatures. And so what we were trying to advocate for here on the percentage part was to tie that to the number of registered voters in the county. So that way, if something crazy like a pandemic happens or whatever, and that those elections have to be put together again, that number's not just jumping up crazy out of nowhere. And so we were thinking somewhere around 4%. The state actually has something in the laws on this. They don't have anything directly dealing with local petition things, but they do when it comes to getting signatures for like a charter amendment, which is a little different from an ordinance, but I think that's what the city is going off of now. And so in there, it says that it has to be at least 5% of the registered voters of the municipality, or 20,000, whichever is lower. So right now, the Charter Review Committee just completely out of nowhere, they didn't like our 4%, and they said that was arbitrary, which it really wasn't arbitrary. If they would have asked us that, we could have given them a little background about how we kind of came up with that number. So it wasn't really arbitrary on our end, but they said, oh, well, their 4% is really arbitrary. So let's just make our own arbitrary number of 10%. So they just said 10%, which again, there's about 198,000 registered voters, something like that. And so you're still going to need 19,000, almost 20,000 signatures to get a petition through. That effectively makes it as close to impossible as it can be. So none of these folks on this committee, I can assure you, have ever had to do a citizen petition, because we did, and they definitely haven't had to do one in a pandemic, which we did. And so the difficulty to get 3,600 signatures is pretty great. And the reason why they were able to do this so quickly on the sanctuary city for the unborn is because they went directly to several mega churches. And so they had access to large groups of people who were just automatically signing it because of their beliefs, right? And so that was a different scenario. But if you're trying to put any other petition about anything out there, you're not going to have that kind of support unless it's something of that nature. And so it was very hard to get 3,600, which we didn't even come close. But to try to get somebody to do that for 19,000, 20,000 signatures, it's going to have to take a massive effort. Not that it's impossible, but it's closer to impossible than possible, which was ironic because the committee members, several of them were saying, well, we don't want to make it so hard that people can't do it, but we don't want to make it a cakewalk either. They pretty much made it where nobody can do this.
I do wonder about that, right? Is 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 part of that, a response to the sanctuary cities effort, and there's a concern on their part, um, that in the future they could see more of these, and so they want to make the bar higher. But the flip side of that is you can create recommendations, or you can create a citizen petition process for legislation, for an ordinance that specifically has language saying that it first has to be known to be legal under the laws of the state and federal government. That is something that other cities have in their charter. It's something that you can very much so put in there. And so that has been, one aspect of the conversation. In our mind, that is enough of a barrier to making sure that we don't have to go through this type of process in the future. And so why increase the total number that you have to get of signatures to such a high level at the same time? It seems excessive, at least from my opinion.
Yeah, it really is. And as you were mentioning, that was kind of one of the things I was going to bring up next. Was yeah, there we were advocating for. Okay, so let me give you a little quick back story to this part. And just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, we've got a couple of questions in here, but we'll answer all of those at the end. So if you have any questions about anything we're talking about, go ahead and put them either in the Q&A on the Zoom or in the comment section on the Facebook, and we will get to those towards the end of the show. Just wanted to put that out there. So as far as the safeguard that we were advocating for. So currently, as the rule is, once you get your signatures, it goes in front of the city council. The city council has 2 readings of an ordinance to pass it. And so if the city council votes a citizen ordinance down, as it currently stands, as the rules currently stand, if they vote it down, then the initiating committee then has the option by law to be able to request that go on a ballot, which is why we have the sanctuary city for the unborn thing on the ballot that was on May 1st. So that's just how it stands right now. And there's nothing stopping an illegal ordinance like the sanctuary city for the unborn ordinance that was passed from going on to a ballot. And that's a problem because of what we're dealing with now, which is what we were ringing the alarm on the whole time, is that if this illegal ordinance passes by citizen vote or not, then we're going to have to be dealing with these legal fees and all the other stuff that comes with that. So our idea on this was there should be language in there that says if an ordinance gets voted down by the city council, that it should be vetted for legality before it's eligible to be put on a ballot. So if this was in place for the sanctuary city for the unborn thing, the city council would have voted it down. The initiating committee would have said, okay, we want this to go to a ballot for citizen vote. And then the city attorney would have came in to vet the ordinance for legality. That way, if it's not going to be legal, it will not be eligible for a ballot. So that was our idea. I don't know exactly why they didn't go with that option, and maybe they just had something better in mind. But from what we've gathered is that they are going to change the definition of an initiative to include that it cannot be in conflict with a state or federal law. So they're going to have language in there that specifically speaks to this. And so again, right now, these are just recommendations of the Charter Review Committee. The council will still have to vote on these. But from our experience, usually things that are recommended by the councils are not changed very much at all once the council votes on
And I
them.
will point out is, as we're having this conversation about how far our advocacy has either gone or not gone on charter review, one of the things that actually from our standpoint was the most important that we contested and stopped was actually the resurrection of a Jim Crow era policy of at-large council positions. And so while we've had difficulties on having these committee members, one, see what the citizen input has been in this process, I think that's been the most challenging is sort of watching these two very passionate public hearings and then watching this committee pretend as though that those things didn't happen. But when it comes to if we're tallying up recommendations that we've made or efforts on this that we've fought and have seen movement and seen change on, we've actually have done a lot in this process already. Some of the biggest things that we were able to do, though, are things that are essentially will never be known, right? We'll never see these. They'll never have an impact because our efforts were essentially to prevent those things from happening. And so, as we're talking about this, I do want to point out for folks that are listening, we're having frustrations on some of these pieces, but at the same time, we are, and you are, for those of you who have been writing comments, and please continue to do that. For those of you that turned out to the public hearings and made those the energetic, passionate meetings that they were, we are succeeding in this on a lot of these topics, on a lot of these efforts. But we're never going to settle when it comes to making sure that we continue to advocate for issues related to inclusion in the city, and making sure that everybody in our community can participate in city life and in the city's democracy.
Yeah, and I'm very aware that now that I've been dealing with these kind of processes, I understand that when you're dealing with an entire city with several districts, right, on a lot of different issues, no one group is going to get everything they want, right? And that's totally understandable. But on issues like you say, issues about inclusion and about making the process fair, there should be no conflict among any district, right? And so, yeah, like you said, we're not going to give in on this. A lot of these fights are going to be years long. Some of these things may be decades long that we are advocating on. But we're gonna hang in there. That's for sure. And so the other thing that we were advocating for on the petition process was for the ability for people to gather signatures electronically. So like, I know a lot of people have seen the different online petitions, websites and stuff, right? Change.org and things of this nature. Those actually do work in certain instances. And we were thinking originally that the e-sign act, which is the federal law, and then there's a similar version of that for states, of which Texas has adopted, that basically say that any signature that can be written by hand, that because of the technology that's behind those e-signature programs where you like sign something online and things of that nature, there's a lot of validation that goes on behind the scenes to where they can say, yes, it was this person who signed it, even though it's not you physically signing it. And so the laws state that that's valid for handwritten things, but this is dealing with commerce, right? That's dealing with business stuff, business transactions. And so there's nothing really in those laws that I could find that deal with government things like a petition for, an ordinance or something of this nature. And unfortunately, in the state law, which was brought to our attention by hearing this committee speak about it, there is actually language in there that specifically states on a petition that the only part of it actually that has to be written in ink is the signature. And so that's what the city is going to move on. There's really nothing that we can do about that at this point in time. And then so there's another thing in here. And we're not sure on the dates. I know they were talking about 6 months or talking about a year, but if a referendum is enacted, that they are wanting it to be able to be repealed by the council by a majority of vote. And I know they were talking about six months later or a year later, so we're not exactly sure on which of those they chose. We think it was the year, but we're not for sure. And then the recall, I know that the recall part of this is if your district would want to recall your city council person, or if the city at large wanted to recall the mayor, there's a process for that. And so I don't think they're changing anything about the process, but I think one of the things they were saying about this is that if you get recalled, that you shouldn't be able to run for office again for 5 years, I believe is what they're trying to settle on. But I don't think they're changing anything else about that. Nick, do you you know more about this than I think at this point? But the recall, do you remember what the recall rules are currently if you wanted to recall a council person?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I think is good that they've looked at, and in a conversation that we've tried to have with them. Our original charter, it really doesn't go, it really doesn't think to the future on these issues. So, for example, if an ordinance, like we talked about with the citizen petition process, if an ordinance is passed through that election, right? So tomorrow, if Lubbock City Council said sanctuary city for the unborn ordinance, we don't like it, they could actually repeal it right now, even though the citizenry and the charter essentially created this process to make it real. The council actually has the ability to overturn it at a moment's notice. And similarly, when it came to the recall component of our charter, there really aren't limitations on when the person could actually go back and run again. And so on the issue of making sure that the council couldn't repeal a citizen ordinance, I think for us, very much so in strong agreement that there should be a cooling off period before the city has the ability to overturn something like that. Now, my assumption is when the folks wrote this charter, that their thinking was if the city council were to go against a citizen petition like that, they would likely all be voted out of office. So that's my assumption as to why these types of mechanisms didn't exist there at the time. But and so you see this sort of throughout it. The charter and the mechanisms that it puts in place for these types of things, they didn't really think next level, right? So if this happens, then what? They didn't really go very far down that chain of logic to make sure that these things were in place. So those aspects of it, I think, are really necessary for cleanup. And I think for folks just kind of listening, we're still getting a lot of traction and getting a lot done on this issue. We as the compact and community advocates, we're advocating for charter reform before the city created the committee, created this process. We've been vocal about these topics since last year, whenever these conversations were just simply beginning. And since that time, we've succeeded in preventing at large, so essentially resurrecting Jim Crow era policy. We effectively prevented that from happening. We've been able to make sure that issues like making the ordinance readings going down from 2 readings to 1 is not going to happen. We've gotten new standards for the referendums, like we've talked about. Even though they're proposing a high number for signatures, one of the things that we were advocating for is what stabilized the number of signatures necessary for these petitions, which we've now had. There hasn't been any movement on their part on term limits, which we disagreed with, because being able to vote somebody in or out is essentially term limits. There's no reason to have something beyond that. And even though, and we're about to have this conversation on compensation, even though they're not at a living wage, they have, because of these conversations, they have bumped up the amount of compensation that they're thinking for the city council. And the last conversation that they had was $800 a month for council members and $1,300 a month for the mayor.
Yeah. So Adam Pirtle says that volunteers in AmeriCorps, our domestic Peace Corps, get a larger stipend than council members will get if these recommendations go forward. That's a good bit of information to put out there. I just think that it's been so ridiculous listening to the conversation around this in this committee, and it's probably a good thing that I was watching on Zoom for most of this, because it is so frustrating. There is literally no good argument that I can sit here and report to you against a living wage that we've heard from the people on this committee that makes any sense. It's all been based on what that individual person and whoever their influences are feels about it. It has not had anything to do with all of the data that Lubbock Compact has provided them, all of the data that the city staff has provided them. It has had all the 4 hours of public comments that were given to them, the several, I don't know how many emails that have been sent to them advocating for a living wage and saying that, people agree that they need a living wage. None of that has come into play in these conversations. And this again goes back to why the people in these seats matter, because it's not this council is not only voting on what goes before them. They're the ones appointing these people to these committees. And so if you have somebody of a certain mind frame on the council and they're appointing somebody for their committee, as we've seen, they generally have a similar mind frame to the person who appointed them. And so what ends up happening is what has been the biggest obstacle to anything happening for East and North Lubbock, let's say, is the fact that the city council, you have 5 members on the council who don't give a rat's behind about East and North Lubbock. They don't care. That's not their experience. It's not the experience of their family or their friends. It never has been. And matter of fact, most of their life, they've probably been fed misinformation and misconceptions about East and North Lubbock. And so there's a level of disdain there for East and North Lubbock, though that they won't admit it. I mean, they won't say this out in public anyway. But if you've lived in Lubbock your entire life, we all know collectively what you're implying when you make comments about East Lubbock or somebody from East Lubbock. We know what you're implying. And so it's not a secret. It's out there. Everybody understands. And then on the council, you'll have 2 people who do care about East and North Lubbock because they're from those districts. But that doesn't really matter because it's 2 against 5 on everything. And so what generally tends to happen on the city council level is that we can't get anything or we end up getting very little when it comes to East and North Lubbock. And the whole rest of those 5 council members end up getting basically whatever they want or whatever somebody else says that they want. And so when you have these committees and they're built the same way, you end up with the same thing. So I don't know, $9,600 a year. Y'all let me know. What would $9,600 a year do for you or your family if you were really wanting to run for city council, you wanted to take the job seriously and you wanted to give it your all? What is $9,600 going to do for you? If you want to go even beyond that and be the mayor, what is $15,600 a year going to do for you? So besides Adam Pirtle's example he just gave, and then I'll hand it off to you, Nick. What we're doing here is we're proposing to pay our mayor that has all this responsibility and is looking over 800 and something million dollars of a city budget, along with these other council members. We're paying this person what a person who cleans hotel rooms might make per year, or somebody who might clean houses might make per year. Right. And not even full-time, probably, because there's probably full-time workers that clean in hotels and houses and things who probably make more than that. Like, you probably have crew members at restaurants. Matter of fact, I know you have crew members at restaurants. Most of them make more than that. Like, kids my daughter's age are making $11 an hour, right? $12 an hour. So Nick, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. To me, trying to put it in terms where we think of how does this compare? What does it mean about a city where its city council members are paid essentially below the poverty line? What does it mean that we would have a mayor who is eligible to collect food stamps. What is it that we're saying as a community? If the challenge and the arguments that we've been making to this committee and to the city council and that sort of next level, for folks that are thinking is, what happens next in this conversation, these recommendations will go to the council next month, and that will be our opportunity to again be able to advocate. But what do these numbers ultimately represent? What we are advocating for is not even necessarily an exact number, although we have given exact numbers and we have given justifications for them when we talk about a living wage. But what we're advocating for is to understand that in our community, about 80% of our adult population can never participate in this democratic process. And this is where we get into some gray area, because people say, well, how, as a, we're a nonprofit, we're an inclusive advocacy organization. How can you be involved in advocating for new individuals on a city council, things like that? We're not advocating for specific individuals. We're advocating for opportunity, right? We're advocating for saying, at some day, I would love it if a daycare provider could run for city council, right? I would love it if a restaurant worker could run for city council. That is the place we need to get as a community, because when you look at us in the numbers, you very quickly realize that as a city, we are a working class town, and our city council should reflect that and should have some indication of that. And so it's a challenge, I think, to look at this and to say, this committee keeps getting lost in the weeds around, well, should we link this minuscule amount of financing they'll get to the consumer price index, or should we use a different index? And to me, it's when you're saying, okay, I don't care if $1 is linked to the consumer price index or linked to a different monetary index that the Federal Reserve uses, it's still a dollar, right? Like, it's never going to turn into the ability to ensure that our council members have 40 hours a week to put in the time and to make sure that they are making sure that governance of our cities is their full and utmost attention. So I think that those are my sort of thoughts on that, and we can have a brief conversation on American Rescue Act if you want to transition to that, or if you have more things that you want to give a quick comment on.
No, I guess we'll go ahead and do these two questions. We don't have any other questions, but if anybody has any other questions before we get off of here, put them in the comment section on the Facebook page or on the Q&A on the Zoom. So the first one is about the sanctuary city. So with Abbott's heartbeat bill, this is the bill that they just signed today, where it's basically outlawing abortions after 6 weeks. Will the ordinance still be illegal under state law?
Yeah, it would be, yeah, and the reason for that is because they're in a basic sense, the reason is because they're not exact, and there is state level law that says when it comes to regulation of healthcare facilities or health provisioning, that state law always preempts and supersedes anything that happens at the local level. So anything that would actually happen at the state level on this topic, even this heartbeat bill, which technically you could consider to be more lenient than the sanctuaries. I know for a lot of people, the heartbeat bill is also something that is just very abhorrent. But when you look at these, the sanctuary cities for the unborn ordinance that we have in Lubbock is more restricted than that. And so even under that scenario, it would still be illegal.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, federal law makes it illegal. So Roe v. Wade has not been overturned. Mississippi, I believe it is trying to take that to the Supreme Court to have it re-looked at. As of now, Roe v. Wade is not overturned. So the other one real quick is the ERCOT transition. Is this just LP&L, or is this LP&L and South Plains Electric Co-op?
Yeah, so if you are in the South Plains Electric Co-op area of Lubbock County, or the portion of Lubbock that it touches, congratulations, you don't have to deal with any of this. So you are under an electrical co-op, which is regulated under very different statutes at the state level. The way that they get their power and their agreements and things like that are all very separate from Lubbock Power and Light. So the ERCOT transition is only related to Lubbock Power and Light customers, not to SPC as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And then just one quick comment from Adam Pirtle again before we move on to the American Rescue Plan. But he had a comment on the faultiness of the it's a service position argument, right? So I'm pretty sure everybody out there would say firemen. And then I think this is something you spoke to last time, Nick. Like firemen serve the community. That's a service position. EMT people, police officers, these people serve the community. But if you look at a fireman's starting wage is $52,000 a year. So, I think you were saying like last time, like how far do we take that, right? Like, well, let's just not pay police officers then. Wasn't everybody all up in arms about defund the police because
Right.
they serve, but these
Yeah.
people who serve on council, screw them, I guess.
Right. Even now, Lubbock's police represent. It's not a union, but it's a government association of police officers. Is actually making the request for a salary increase, and firefighters is a great example, right? Because when it's a mark of pride for most cities when you're able to pay your firefighters, because when you're a small community and you can't afford that service, it is a volunteer firefighter service. And no one, no one at least when your city gets big, like Lubbock is, no one says, let's keep it an all volunteer because we don't want people being firefighters for the wrong reason.
Yeah, we don't want them to do it just for the paycheck. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Well,
The
nobody's running for even a $30,000 paycheck. I would hate to bust anybody's bubble out there who has that argument. If we made the mayor and city council positions paid like Laredo, for instance, $75,000 a year for the mayor, $50,000 a year for the city council positions. This has been misconstrued by the committee as well, I feel like, because they brought this up and they say, oh, well, people are looking at all these other cities and such and such. We're not looking at it as a comparison necessarily one-to-one to Lubbock. What we're holding that up as is an example where they are paying the mayor and city council a living wage and have been doing so, and the city still exists. It hasn't fallen off the earth. It hasn't crumbled into itself and imploded. Like, it's okay. You can pay these people a living wage. And if you look at Laredo's city council, if you go to their website, anybody out there who's curious, go to the city of Laredo's website and go look at their city council members. Out of 9 of those city council members, I can guarantee you at least about 5 or 6 of those people are under the age of 40, and at least about 3 or maybe, but yeah, probably about 3 of them are probably no doubt closer to the age of 30 than they are to the age of 40. And their median age of people in their city is almost identical to Lubbock, 29 years old. We have nobody even near 30 years old in our city council and never have. And we never will at this rate if we let this go through. And I hate to just keep harping on this so much, but this is so important because we've had things happening one way, which is it has to be a service position. What does that mean? That means you have to be able to afford to work a full-time job and not get paid. The only people who can do this, as history has shown in Lubbock and pretty much everywhere else in the country where the rules are similar, is people who are retired because they don't have to work and they get some sort of income, right? Some sort of retirement income, or they've had savings or whatever, or people who are independently wealthy. So the only one on our council right now that I guess you could say has a job is a lawyer. That's a law firm. That's not a job. And she actually had the audacity to say, oh, well, you just go talk to your boss. She did not go talk to her boss. She went to go talk to the partners in her law firm, of which she is one. And they can't really tell her anything other than, okay, have a great time. Like, this is not the same thing. And so we have to put this into perspective. And the amount of people, real quick, and I'll let you chime in, or we can go do American Rescue Plan real quick, Nick. But the amount of people who have had this argument, who I know for a fact have spent their lives working in the working class, who are actually arguing and advocating very loudly that these people who work a full-time job don't need a full-time pay is crazy to me. I don't know how that works in people's mind, but it is what it is. But yeah, really quick before we get out of here, we can talk about American Rescue Plan.
Yeah, and this week, this is mostly just the PSA because we'll have more of this conversation next week. But something for Lubbock citizens to be aware of. So as part of the American Rescue Act, so this is the most recent COVID relief bill, there was specifically money set aside for cities and counties across the United States. And so both Lubbock County as well as the city of Lubbock they're going to get about similar amounts. It's in the $60 million range. That is a lot of financing. And currently, the city does not have, right, there is no mechanism or oversight over how the city uses those dollars. So in Lubbock, historically, this is where we've had challenges when there's a very large sum of money that is in play, and there is currently no way for citizen input on this process. And so going forward, I think one of the conversations that we're going to want to have is one, what are folks, what is it that you wish that these dollars were going to be used for? What are the types of projects that you thought or would hope that Lubbock would try to finance for community development, for economic development? But then also, how do we create accountability in this process? A lot of cities are creating blue ribbon committees of people from their universities, people from their professional communities, people from the neighborhood associations, to get them to come together and to weigh in on how best to use these dollars. We really, as a community, should be trying to move in a direction like that as well, because historically, and this is not necessarily to say anything about this council specifically, but historically in Lubbock, when there have been opportunities for the council to make choices with a large sum of money and no accountability, they oftentimes don't make the best ones for us, so much so as the individuals that have their ear or the ones that see them at the country club or the golf course or things like that. So this is something that we definitely want to raise the profile of and make sure that citizen input is heard on this topic, and that we do this in a way where all of the community has the ability to weigh in on how these dollars are going to be used.
Yeah, and we have made a post about this on our Facebook page, so please follow our Facebook page. But you can go through there on that as well. But we will be further in this conversation, and you can put in the comments too right now if you have any ideas of what you think these funds should be used for. There was an article, I believe, that came out in the AJ that was speaking about it. So just if you want to get a little bit more information, I know that they were talking about that it can be used for things such as infrastructure, things of that nature, but it can also be used for things that will help the city going forward, right? So there's different ways that this can be used. It's very broad, I would assume, as far as what it could be used for. And so we do think that we as a community need to start to think about this and figure out what's going to happen. Start making some noise to where they do create a committee, for instance, or I think that would be probably the best way to go. I mean, honestly, as long as, like you say, it's not just city council appointees and things of this nature, the neighborhood associations, people being involved, various organizations like Lubbock Compact or others that may be doing work out there. I think all of these groups need to be in on that conversation. And so we will push for that for sure in any way that we can, and we will keep y'all updated on that. So,
and one thing on that is this is not use it or lose it dollars. We have multiple years to use these dollars. So if you're in the community or if you're hearing folks talk about it, if you're hearing politicians locally talk about it and say that we need to get that out the door, we need to do this, we can't make a committee, we can't be strategic about this because we have to get this out there. That is not true. Sometimes there are government programs where it's use it or lose it, and you have a deadline, you have to do it. With these dollars, that is not the case. We have the time to take a moment as a community, take a breath, and think about strategically how these dollars are going to be most effective for our community. And really the best way to do that is just simply to get input from the community and to do it in a way that ensures that the citizens of Lubbock and our voices are heard as that process.
Yeah, and with that, we are going to close out the show. And so, just a quick reminder, in the spirit of what Nick just said, I would like to encourage everybody. If you have a neighborhood association in your neighborhood, please start joining those. If you don't have a neighborhood association, maybe consider creating one. I know that a lot of the historical neighborhoods have them. Some of the newer ones may not, but these are going to be the best vehicles that we have to get input in onto these things. And so encourage you to do that all the time. Also, you can follow us on Facebook. As I said, you can follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like and a comment if you would. And if you want to support the work of Lubbock Compact or the Lubbock Compact Live show, please consider donating to Lubbock Compact at lubbockcompact.com/donate. Any amount helps. We have different options on there for you, one time, recurring, whatever you want to do. And we also have some cool merchandise, I believe, on our website that you can get. If it's not up there yet, it will be up there very soon. But there's various ways that you can help out the Lubbock Compact, and we appreciate anybody that does that. And of course, if you want to volunteer, you can go to lubbockcompact.com/volunteer. We are looking for volunteers. Specifically right now, if you have video editing experience or audio editing experience or both, it would be really cool if we could find somebody that maybe had both, but if not, that's fine too. But we do need some video editing and audio editing for the show. And so we are looking for somebody to do that. And we also have other various things. You can go to lubbockcompact.com/volunteer. And thank you for everybody for tuning in, and good night.